Warm Health from Mzansi greetings. Welcome to another episode. Weekly, we shine a spotlight on remarkable individuals contributing to the healthcare sector in South Africa. Today, we share the incredible journey of Snenhlanhla Mshengu, an educational psychologist whose work with children on the autism spectrum is truly making a difference. Inspired by a family friend in psychology, she found her calling after initially considering medicine and law. Her passion for psychology, especially assessments, led her to focus on supporting children with autism. She researched the experiences of Black African parents with children who are autistic, emphasizing cultural sensitivity in her work. Sine, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It really is an absolute pleasure to be able to get to know a little bit more about your field or work as an educational psychologist in the healthcare space. Welcome to it.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I like to start with early childhood, growing up years, a bit about your family, a bit about your background. Maybe you can just take us through that as a start.
I am the third of 4 children that I was raised by my grandmothers. My mom was working overseas, and my grandmom took over as in terms of our primary caregivers. It was her aunt and her mother. My grandmoms is how I refer to them. So those are the ones who were always around me and helped raise me. A big part of my growing up was watching my grand give to others. She's always spoken about how important it is to give back, especially to the community. So I think I took a large part in that, where we all volunteered a lot as kids. So I've got 2 older sisters and a younger brother. So we've all sort of found ourselves, actually funny enough, in the spaces of doing things that are health related, with the exception of my brother. My sister is a doctor. My other sister is now currently doing her PhD looking at health around South Africa, especially the NHI health bill. And then there's me, and then my little brother's into economics. So I think a lot of how we were raised and the values our grandparents gave to us are what made us who we are and want to go into a sector where we're able to help others in various ways.
And you've actually answered my next question in terms of why pursue a career in psychology and specifically educational psychology. But I just got really excited also just to know that I could also speak to your siblings on this podcast, so we can make it a bit of a family gathering. I'll feature all of you. But that's amazing. So you guys are all somewhat in the healthcare space, except for your brother as an economist. It's amazing. So is it just because of your grandparents that you got into it? What drew you initially to a career in psychology?
I was going to the plan initially in high school was supposed to be medicine. And then I forgot to write that test they write in June. So I was like, okay. And then
next one.
Let me see about psych, because it's a friend of mine, the sister of a psychologist, and she always spoke about how rewarding her job was. So then I started going down the psychology road, not realizing it actually takes so long as well. And then with the ed psych, after honors and people were applying for things, I thought, okay, I don't know what to apply for. And I really liked learning about assessments in my honors year. So I had heard that with ed psychs that you do a lot of assessments. So I thought, okay, let me just see. And then I sort of fell into it.
I do understand from speaking to some colleagues in your field is that it does take a long time to qualify, and it's so very strenuous to get into the various programs, especially master's programs. If you could just take us a little bit through your education from high school and then a bit of your work. And then I want to get into some of the work that you're doing in terms of the autism spectrum disorder. Next, thanks.
In terms of education, so I'm from KZN in Pietermaritzburg. So I did my matric there. I then moved up to Joburg and I went to Wits, where I did my undergraduate degree. While I was doing that, however, also I think in my 3rd year I was doing industrial psychology, and we learned a bit about labor law, and I thought I had fallen in love with law. So after that, I actually pursued a degree in law. I then stopped in 3rd year, because then I realized 4th year they have moot courts and you have to do a lot of public speaking, which is not really my strong point. So then I stopped doing law, and then I took a year off. And then my mom was just like, no, I have no child who's going to be sitting around and not going to school. So then I went and I did my honors in psychology. And then that's where I fell in love, specifically assessments. And I then carried on and then did my master's. It does take quite a while, to be honest. It takes about 6 years if you're going to include your internship, and longer if your research is not done, because you can't do your board exam if your research isn't done. I know getting into the master's program as well is difficult. I was fortunate enough to get in the first year I had applied, but I know people who have applied for 6 years in a row and still weren't able to get in.
Sine, as I understand it, your research on autism was specifically within the Black community. What inspired you to focus on this, and how has your findings influenced your practice?
So what did inspire me was my research supervisor in honors. Her area of interest was autism. So we got along quite well and we'd speak about it quite often. And it then became something that I really wanted at that point. I didn't know what it was. So I really started running to grow my knowledge in it and find out other ways, like more information about it. So then when I did get into my master's, that's when I did my research, but I looked specifically at Black African parents' experiences of having their children diagnosed. Because I think a lot of the research that is out there had been at the time focused mainly on the European world and had just started coming into Africa. So I focused a lot on looking at it and from that perspective and how Black people then also understand autism and what it is. And that got me into that train track onto autism. And I think it's helped me understand so much how I think culture, in as much as it isn't always considered within a therapeutic process, that it is important to understand as well. And I think that also happens with assessments that we do, that some items are usually not culturally specific, which makes it difficult for certain kids or adults to answer certain questions. And I think that's then my route of wanting to understand culture and language and how that plays a role within psychology.
You've actually given some insights or sharing some of your understanding when it comes to diagnosing ASD, but particularly in terms of that early intervention and support. How does one kind of understand that based on everything that you just mentioned when it comes to language and culture and all of that?
In terms of early intervention, the best thing is the earlier we intervene, the better. So especially with children with ASD. However, what I have seen in research is in Africa, we do have later diagnoses than anywhere else in the world, where the ideal age of diagnosis should be about 18 months. But we're sitting at 8 years. And the thoughts around that are usually that it's only really picked up when our child is at school. And even then, it's harder, I think, for teachers and parents to realize it when children have high IQs. So that does also then end up causing a further delay with some children being diagnosed.
Is it because there's not enough awareness of it, that this late diagnosis, what are the strategies do you think that are most effective in supporting not only individuals with ASD, but also parents and kind of giving them more insight into what to look out for to be able to diagnose earlier?
A big part of it is, I think, psychoeducating, not even just parents alone. I think maybe in the education system that would also be helpful and beneficial for teachers, especially ECD teachers who do see children when they're younger, so they are able to know what to look for. I know one of the main things that they usually do look for is eye contact. But I think research has also shown that, especially in African communities, that's not something, especially in South Africa, that's considered, because eye contact is something a child wouldn't give you anyway, as it's seen as disrespectful. And I think that's where then culture comes into play, where yes, it is a symptom. However, because of cultural differences, that's not expected from all children. I'm not expecting a 4-year-old from KZN to look me in the eye as an adult. So that isn't something you should be looking for anyway in terms of them. So what you can look for usually is repetitive behaviors or interests. So generally, children with ASD can have very focused or unilateral interests. So for instance, if they like cars, they'll really be into cars, or if boats or whatever the case may be. My supervisor at some point had spoken about a child she was seeing who really liked fans, and that's all he cared about. So I think looking for interests like that, looking for repetitive behaviors. I know some children will sort of say the same thing over and over again, or they'll do certain things over and over again. And then looking at social interactions as well. Children with ASD won't have any interest in actually sort of interacting with others in any way, shape or form, unless they need something or they are choosing to interact, but they are very, very happy to play alone. And that is not to say a child that plays alone is autistic, but that is something to look for. And usually in their play, they have a tendency of arranging things in a very specific order. I had a child I was seeing who liked cars, but every time he played, it wasn't about playing with the cars. He just lined them up in rows according to their colors and according to how light and how dark a color is. So all the whites would be together and all the reds, but then the reds would go from light to dark like a spectrum. So looking out for behaviors like that, any hand slapping, any stimming, things like that are important to look out for within ASD.
Thank you so much for that outline, Sine. Are there any other aspects that you would maybe advise on or want to touch on in terms of how you integrate these cultural considerations into your therapeutic process or approach, especially when working with diverse populations?
So how I do integrate it is bearing in mind, especially culturally in South Africa, there's so many ways people would like to go. What I have seen is psychological services aren't always the first point of contact. Children will usually be sent to Isangoma or Umthandazi or a priest, or which I think everyone has the right to seek whatever services that they want. But I always then say to parents, because they usually still want to go that route because they are convinced that there's something else that's causing this. So I will never say to a person, don't go. They can go because that's their belief system. So I think it's important to understand those things. And then to also speak. So I have had a parent who wanted to take the child to Isangoma, which is fine. So, but it is important to also speak to that other person who they are consultant with. So as not to harm the child in any way. And then you guys can work together in terms of that, understanding what they have done with them and what you guys are also then doing and focusing on therapy with the child.
And then just in your experience, in working both in NGOs and in a hospital in the United Arab Emirates, what are some of the key differences that you've observed in how psychological services are perceived and utilized in different cultural settings?
At the UAE, it was a very long time ago when I worked there, in their defense as well. But I think from what I could see, there was a language barrier. So my experience there was a bit different because I was only going off what the translator is saying to me. But it did seem for them, or maybe it's just might have been where I was placed, that psychological services were only then used when things were severe enough. And I think that might sometimes be the same in the African community. It's much better now. But before, at the same time where I was there, I think a lot of times people didn't utilize psychological services until they thought it was severe enough. And even then, I think now there is still sometimes where people don't quite understand the purpose of seeking out psych services.
And then I just also wanted to ask about what are some of the most rewarding aspects of offering therapy and assessments in both English and isiZulu, and also how does this, bilingual approach enhance your work with clients, especially within the context of all the cultural considerations and all of that as well? If you can just give us more information on that.
Firstly, just from a language perspective, it allows, I think, my clients, especially my Zulu-speaking clients, to be able to express themselves better, as opposed to just using English, because sometimes people are at a loss for words and they usually then have to try to describe. Whereas then with me being bilingual, they can usually just slot in a word. I am trying with other languages, so I can sort of kind of understand Sotho and trying with Tswana recently. But I think it does give them that openness to actually be able to express themselves in their language. And I think that they can do that more efficiently if they're using home language as opposed to if they second language English speakers. In terms of assessments, I think it is very useful because sometimes a child can struggle and you're not sure if it's just the language that's making them struggle or are they struggling because they genuinely don't understand the concept. I think having that option to ask in their mother tongue also gives you a better understanding of what are the difficulties that they are facing. Are they language-based or is it more? And understanding certain things in terms of culture with them, how they may behave, how discipline is enforced within the family, things like that where are understandable culturally and understanding why they're doing those things.
What would you consider a highlight in your career as an educational psychologist to date? And maybe you can just share some of the more rewarding aspects of your job generally. Did you really see that it came about in practice now, day-to-day working, what that's like for you?
Okay, so in terms of rewarding, I worked a lot with children as well as adults, but mostly children. And I think it is so rewarding for me to see an improvement, or when you hear from a teacher saying the child has improved here and here and here. And I think that for me makes me very happy. The most rewarding moment I had was I had a child who was seeing for social skills who was actually on the spectrum. And he generally just never said hi to people. And then one day he came into the office after a few months of working with him and he greeted everyone and was asking them how they were doing. And I think it seems that was a huge milestone for us. And it made me absolutely excited. I think even as I speak about it, it brings joy to me. So I think being able to help people in spaces like that, and you see improvements in their lives, and sometimes you can physically see the change in a person. And I think there's nothing more rewarding than that within the job. I think there's a lot of admin also involved that people don't realize. There's a lot of reading on our part to be able to prepare ourselves for session. Courses that we go to that can be a lot, because then if you have a full day of work, you end up having to do everything after hours. Private practice is not the easiest thing on earth, but I think I am under a company, an umbrella, where they are very supportive and they are very helpful.
Thank you so much for your time today, Sine. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you a little bit better and more about the work that you're doing. Just as we wrap up, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? And then I always like to ask if there's any specific message that you'd like to share to your colleagues within the healthcare sector.
Ideally, in the next 10 years, I would like to open a center for children with ASD where it's not just only about helping them with social skills, but also providing quality education for them. I think when I was doing research, a lot of parents had issues around quality education for their children. So I think that is important, having people who know how to work within that space effectively. That is the dream. And I hope I get there. A message to my colleagues would just be, I think it's important for all of us to work together. I've seen amazing results from being able to consistently consult with others as a team. So I have constant contact with the doctor, the speech therapist, the psychologist, the psychiatrist. That benefits the people that we see immensely when you are able to do that.
Snenhlanhla Mshengu, your journey is a testament to resilience, compassion, and dedication. Your story inspires us to appreciate the importance of cultural sensitivity and early intervention in psychology services. Thank you for your time and everything of the best with all the amazing work you're doing. And that's a wrap. Until next time, greetings from me, Dawn Numdu, our technical producer Megan van der Vent, and the rest of the team Health for Mzansi. Stay inspired.